I grew up in a Cherokee belief system, and if you asked my grandmother a question, she would tell you a story, and every answer was in the form of a story. So I was used to story being the way to explain things, and sometimes long, drawn-out stories, so much that you just wouldn't ask grandmother the question, you just go take out the garbage and get it over with. But so I grew up in a culture of stories, and I grew up in a world where there were conflicting stories. There was the Baptist story and the Cherokee story and the Pentecostal story, and we had the snake handler story. There were a lot of stories about the way things were. And my grandmother was a story critic, so she would tell me what was wrong with the stories I was hearing. So she had this idea that the Baptists had a bad story because Creator was too nice to punish people after they died. That just wouldn't happen, she said. If there's a hell, it's here on earth. And then she realized that we'd already been there, because where I grew up, there was a town called Hell for Certain, and we'd been there. And so she said, and you've already been to Hell for Certain, and it wasn't so bad. It was just a lot of junk cars and, a few people. So she was a consummate critic of other people's stories, and she puzzled about the Christian story, because she said that she saw our uncle 3 days after he died and had a conversation with him, and nobody started a religion about him. So what's the big deal? I always thought that was hilarious. But so I grew up in a world in which you just tolerated each other's stories, because that was how you got along. You didn't go around saying, well, you got a bad story, nobody will believe that. People didn't do that in southeastern Kentucky in those days. It might be more contentious now, but we just got along. And when I got to medical school, I think that was really my first encounter with this worldview where there's only one right answer. Because in college I was working in biophysics, and we never knew which way was up. We were always trying to figure out what does this data mean. None of what we were doing was very life-threatening, and so it didn't really matter to anybody's well-being if we got it right or not. So we had a lot of fun, contemplating what the data meant. But in medicine and at Stanford, I realized that there was a lot of importance on having the right story, the best story, the only story. And my response was to go find elders to hang out with, so I had competing stories that were more nurturing for me to live by than the ones I was getting in medical school.